Ligonier Ministries. It's part of the Ligonier Connect thing that we do. And so it came in the mail, and instead of putting it in my own library, which was very tempting, I'm just going to give it away. So it's called Facing the Last Enemy. And let's do this. Anybody willing to guess or state where the title of this book comes from in the Bible? The title is called Facing the Last Enemy. Where might that title come from?
Well, the last enemy is death.
I am not going to give any more hints.
Give the book Revelation.
Well, I guess the verse I'm thinking of.
Well, that's fair.
I guess I'll
Oh, let's see, I'm not getting it.
Okay, well, who said Revelation first? Tim, here you go. I was thinking of 1 Corinthians 15, but that is the last one. So,
Joy got it?
Okay, she was ESPN, because you didn't know it.
yeah, there you go. Oh, well. Okay, let's flip over to Colossians chapter 3. This is still under the auspices of our family worship series, but we're going to round out the family worship series by looking at the commands and order of a Christian home. What does a godly Christian home look like? Okay, you got those notes, okay. And last week we covered the first one, wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord, and today we're going to talk about Colossians 3:19. So follow along as I read that. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Okay, there's actually a couple here on husbands and then fathers, but we're going to talk about just husbands and the need to love their wives today. The command is no doubt a simple one. It's straightforward. Love your wives. But the simplicity of that command, we shouldn't just overlook as if that is an easy thing. To love someone else, and we'll get into what that love actually looks like, is a very difficult thing. Love is the most summarized attribute of God towards his people, right? We might say he's good, he's merciful, he's gracious, but he's loving, his loving kindness, all of that revolves around his benevolent, sacrificial, and really generous love that he gives to those who aren't worthy of it. And so we're going to talk about how husbands ought to and how they should love their wives this morning. But before we get into some of the biblical definitions of love, we in our own context use the word love for a lot of different things. We might say, honey, I love you. We might also say, I love chocolate. Or I love my pet. Or I love Cody my own. And no doubt when we say those things, we immediately know there's a differentiation between, honey, I love you, and I love hiking, right? Or at least there should be, right? So love is a very interesting thing, and how the Bible talks about love is very multifaceted. First, I want to get into 3 different words the Greek vernacular, the vocabulary has for love. The first 2, eros and philia, were commonly used words in the Greek language, but agape, the definitely Christian love, actually came along much later in the development of the Greek language. So typically, in just secular Greek language, writing and literature, eros and philia were 2 words for love, most commonly used words for love. Eros is not at all used in the Bible. in the Greek New Testament. Not once. Eros is referring to a kind of love which is knee-jerk reaction, you might even say has taken over you, or some kind of inebriation in love, a smittenness that someone is just kind of out of control, passionate. It also can refer to the Greek goddess of love, Eros, the goddess of love. She is so named because she has the power to make someone forget all reason, will, and discretion. So this is the kind of love, or we might just say lust, which we see in society, movies, books, whatever it is, where when someone says they love someone, there's actually an obsession. And that's what the Greeks would say is an eros kind of love, or we might just say an erotic love, a love which is really uncontrollable and unbridled, just unbridled lust. Philia is another kind of love, and it is defined by a love for people who are closely connected by blood or by faith. Essentially, philia is used for those who are connected to a certain program or a certain agenda. There's a commonality that binds people together, and because of that commonality, they love one another. So a family loves one another because they are all one family, right? Or a country would have love for its countrymen because they're about the propagation of their own country, right? But it isn't just used for secular things, it's used multiple times in the New Testament. In John 5:20, it is used. 5:20 says, "The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing." So here, the Father and the Son love each other, and they love each other in a way because they're bound in agreement with what their purpose is. That's the kind of love that exists between the Father and the Son. It is a love in which they both have mutually agreed to do something, and they have that affection towards each other. They are united in purpose. Another example would be in Titus 3:15. This is a closing comment Paul has to his brother Titus. "All who are with me send greetings to you. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all." So just a question in Titus 3:15, and you can turn there if you want, or just listen to this. He says, "Greet those who love us in the faith." What is defining that love?
The faith, right?
The faith, right? Yeah. So Paul isn't saying we love everybody in this passage, although biblical love is a love for everyone. But he is saying there's a particular love that I want you, Titus, to understand that you should greet each other with, and that is a love for each other in the faith. Because we're all in Christ, we should have a love for one another and care for one another's well-being. It's sometimes put that agape is the only kind of Christian love. Ministries are named like agape ministries or agape church or whatever it is. Agape, the noun for the next kind of love we're going to get into, is definitively a Christian love, but philia sometimes gets a bad rap as if it's not a true biblical love. It is a non-subpar Christian love. It is a genuine, good way to consider how we love one another, and that we are united in a purpose to spread Christ. So that's eros and philia. Agape then is the last one. And one commentator says, agape possesses none of the magic of eros and little of the warmth of philia. I think that is a description prior to the traction that agape would get in the Christian community, but is at one point called a colorless word. We all know words form over time in our vocabulary. At one point, we may not have a word for love, and at another point in time, a community might create some kind of new word for love. And agape comes in Greek literature, and it is heavily contrasted with eros, but it has a lot of overlap with philia. Philia, a brotherly love, a love of united purpose, a love of like-mindedness. A lot of overlap there. But I actually want to spend a little bit of time looking at the difference between eros kind of love and agape love, because they are just polar opposites. And the love of God that He has poured into our hearts is an agape biblical love, not an eros worldly kind of love. So we're going to go through this, and as we then go through this, we'll get to some application later about how then the husband needs to consider this kind of love as we love our wives. So first off, eros. Eros is a general love of the world, seeking satisfaction where it can. Okay. Eros is a love for the world, seeking satisfaction where it can. You can see by that definition, it is a selfish love. It is a love in which someone is seeking an object out, or someone out, or some hobby, or something out, in order to satisfy something within himself. Agape, on the other hand, is a love which makes distinctions, chooses, and keeps its object. So here's an example of agape love in Ephesians 1, 4 and 5. Are these on your notes, or are they? No? Okay, so you can flip over to Ephesians chapter 1. We'll be flipping through quite a bit of the New Testament here. Ephesians 1, 4 and 5. Even as He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before Him. In love, He predestined us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ. So, obviously, that's a rich verse, but he says, Paul does, that God predestined us in love. I'm just going to flip that order around a little bit. For adoption as sons through Jesus Christ. So there we have a great example of how the agape love, which the Father shows, is a love which sets apart one group of people from another group of people. Now, of course, we have to completely put a huge caveat on this, and this is a choice and election, all by divine grace. None of us have deserved and merited God's love. But God has a distinction in His heart between His children and those who aren't His children. And anybody in here, well, actually, everybody in here has been a child at some time, point, even if you're not a parent now. You love your own children, or you, having been a child of someone else, you've been loved by someone else distinctly than some stranger or another good friend or teacher or whoever it might be. Right? Just as a parent has a distinct choosing, keeping love for their child, so does the Father have that kind of love for His child. And this is not a general love Eros has, but a very particular one. Next, Eros is determined by a more or less indefinite impulse towards its object. Agape is a free and decisive act determined by its subject. So, if I love this chair, there's something about this chair, it's comfortable, or its color, or whatever it is, that appeals to me, and I have an impulse to then love the chair, right? But agape is it is the subject. Agape love is a love in which I bestow love upon the chair. I know it's a silly illustration, but sometimes it's hard to find a good chair. But I would determine I love the chair or the person based on my initiation of the love for it, not of any quality in itself. Okay? So Eros is determined by a more or less indefinite impulse. That's like a classic Eros love. Just an impulsive, unbridled, quick, knee-jerk kind of love. Or agape is a free and decisive act. I don't have to love the chair. I'm choosing to love the chair. And it's determined by its subject, God, in this case, or me. So here's a classic text, John 3:16. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Did the world have anything within it that just warmed up God's heart, which he was impulsively obligated to love it? No. Even before the fall, God had said that the world is good and very good because he decides to pronounce it good. He pronounces the world good. He pronounces, husband, it is good for you to have a wife, not to be alone. He pronounces this thing and he makes the definition of the love and the quality of it, not something else determining it upon God. This is how you should esteem me, right? And when we actually think about it that way, we often think about God's love for us in a very eros way. That, well, surely there's something in me which makes God love me. Otherwise, he wouldn't love me. And that's just a graceless statement. I mean, that's a statement where someone doesn't understand. God doesn't love you.
It's pride, it's full of pride.
And it's full of pride, right? So there's nothing in the world. We often use John 3:16. They're held up at banners or baseball games or whatever it is. It is, God does love the world that he gave his only begotten Son. But he loved it despite its unloveliness. And despite its fallenness, despite its sinfulness, he loved the world and gave his Son. Thirdly, eros, in its highest sense, is used of the upward impulsion of man for his love for the divine, of his love for the divine. Agape relates, for the most part, to the love from God, the love of the higher lifting up the lower, elevating the lower above others. God in his agape love raises up the downcast. You see this in Hannah's prayer or Mary's Magnificat. He raises up the downcast. He lifts up the humble. He causes them to dwell with him who is exalted over all things. So agape love is a love where God bestows on others to get them out of the muck and mire, to bless them and to love them and to show his favor upon them. Eros is a love of, I need to get approval. Eros is, I know this person is greater than me, or I esteem this person because he's a celebrity, or because it's a god, or because of whatever it is, or because of the way she looks. I want to then get approval by that person. That's an eros kind of love. It is an empty, selfish kind of love, an upward impulsion. On the other hand, agape is much more of a gospel love. I'm going to lift up this person. And then lastly, we could go on and on, but I think these are just some crucial distinctions between eros love, which we see in the world and in our hearts, but agape love, which is, of course, the form of love we want to pursue. Lastly, eros seeks in others the fulfillment of its own life's hunger. Agape must often be translated to show love, because it is a giving love, an active love on others' behalf. So that's a very classic definition of eros love. It seeks in others the fulfillment of its own life's hunger. It's a leech. It's only pursuing to feed itself because it's in love with itself. That's eros love. Agape, on the other hand, is a giving love, a benevolent love, and it acts on the other person's behalf without any reciprocity coming back. I'm going to love, not expecting anything in return. And we can see this kind of love all throughout Scripture, especially in Jesus' teaching. Someone strikes you on the cheek, strikes you on the cheek, turn the other also. Right? Love your neighbor, love your enemy. inherent in Christian ethic is the love of, I will do the right thing, the honorable thing, the loving thing, despite what I get back from others. And yeah, it's extremely hard and infuriating, because Christians should know, if I was so treated nicely, I should also then do it back, not in the sense of debtor's ethic, I owe it to you. But Paul does say, hey, owe everyone, how does he say it in Romans 13? Oh, oh, no one anything, this is Romans 13:8. Oh, no one anything except to love each other. So you'll never be out of debt for loving each other in some way. So anyways, let's see, where was I going? I'm off track here. Oh, agape, showing others love. We would love because we know it is, for one, what we ought to do. Two, it is because it is in that model of love, in that form of love, that God has loved us. And even though we might show love and not get any love back, or worse, we might actually get harm back. It's okay. That's how Christ loves. And of course, we leave vengeance to the Lord and all that to Him. 1 John 3:16 is a good example of this. By this we know love, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Very legitimate question. So here's agape, non-eros love, that Jesus laid down His life for His people. And He did so when we were obedient, and righteous, and loving, and lovable. No. He justifies the ungodly. He laid down His life for us, Romans 5 says, when we were enemies. Yes, three distinctions. While we are weak, while we are sinners, and while we're enemies. That's when Christ laid down His life for us. So you can see then just the continental divide between eros love and agape love. And philia does have some overlap with agape, but it is a little different. I wouldn't say agape is unconditional love and philia is not unconditional love. It might be, it might not be. But clearly, eros love, which we see in ourselves, in our fallen hearts, in the world, is completely antithetical to the love of the gospel and the love of God. Okay, any questions on that before we get to some of the application here, which I have left empty so you guys can write in there. Oh, no, you're not allowed to ask questions.
When talking about God's love, and how He created us to glorify Him for His glory.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when you were saying that, it just made me think of, I guess I was processing through, okay, if God created me for His glory, it's not He needs glory from me. It's not He's loving me in order to receive something back, but it's that He's already glory. He already is fully glorified. But it glorifies Himself to
Yeah.
maybe. And it's an expression of his glory in doing everything that he does.
Mhm.
It's not a receiving back of, or as if he emptied himself and then gave it back, like.
Right.
Because I think that can sometimes get confusing. Well, if he created, why did he then, create me if he didn't really, need anything back,
Yeah.
why is he, I don't know, I just, maybe a bit more sense of what I'm saying,
Well, I'm following, but yeah, for one, there's no deficiency in God in which he creates out of a lack in himself. He is maximally happy and enjoying himself. And it is out of that maximal life that he has in himself, he creates to bring people into that, knowing that their best life now or later in the future is sharing in the life of God, right? So yes, there's no deficiency in God, and he is glorified and he does receive praise by sending his son to die on the cross, that he would be exalted, that we would give praise to him. But even then, we find our satisfaction in that. And even though God creates, I'm about to get off track. I'm just saying. Even though God creates in order to receive praise, there's nothing lacking in him for that purpose. And so what I was going to say was, often we think of eschatology, the study of end times, as the millennium, the rapture. We fight about dates and whatever it is. But eschatology is really the sum total and end of all of God's will and plan. And in that sense, eschatology drives soteriology. So the study of salvation, the cross, and being reconciled to God is not an end to itself. The cross and salvation serves as a means to get us to the end, which is communion with God. Now, we have communion with God now. But that eschaton moment, that eschatological final moment where we're in blissful communion with God forever, that is him enfolding us into his joy, and him doing so not to receive a reciprocal gift back, but because he does so out of his own lovingness. So I think it's Jonathan Edwards, I might have even said it here before, he says, it's either Jonathan Edwards or Henry Scougal. I think it's Henry Scougal. He says it's no defect to a fountain if it's prone to overflow. In fact, there's a book on the book table, The Life of God and the Soul of Man, an amazing book. It's in the book table. Please grab it, rent it out, whatever, buy it, steal it, get it. But it's no defect of a fountain if it's prone to overflow. That's the Lord of glory. The Lord is an overflowing fountain of goodness. And if in overflowing the walls of the fountain, it splashes onto us, wonderful for us, right? So yeah, we share in that. Does that summarize what you're saying? Okay. Any other questions?
And who you think that quote is no defect of a fountain is prone to overflow? Who are you attributing that to?
Henry Scougal, Scougal, I think. Is that right? Yeah.
Scoughal.
I think it's
There's
just
no H.
G-A-L.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
The edition we have on the book table is a much more readable edition than I've read. Have you the old one? Yeah, and it's kind of a grind. It's good. I mean, there's diamonds in there, but you can get the diamonds and not, spend without the tears. Yes, right. Okay, so let's get into some of this application then. So how should husbands love their wives? if this is the agape love that Paul has here for husbands, he doesn't say husbands, eros your wives in a way of become so infatuated with them that you lose all sense of reason, right? But he says, love your wives with agape love. So, first off, husbands ought to love their wives, and this is just going to be a bit of a repetition from what we've already covered, with distinction. Husbands need to love their wives with distinction. So the husband would give his wife love that he doesn't give anyone else. Not anyone else. Not anyone else. There's a particular kind of distinctive, choosing love that the husband has for his wife that he won't share with anyone. And when he does, that's adultery. Okay? And this again is just like Yahweh has for his own people. Yahweh loves his special, redeemed, elect people in a way which he doesn't love others. He loves others, but he loves them differently. Secondly, husband's love for his wife should be graciously given, freely given. He doesn't love her because she conducts herself worthy of him. He doesn't love her when it is most convenient to him. No, the husband loves his wife freely and generously. Whether she earned the love, whether she demerited the love, he bestows his love on her because he chooses to and graciously does so. Now, that is not at all, I know these first two, in fact, more than the first two are in this analogy, putting the husband in the position of God. Obviously, the husband and the wife are equal. But in terms of the kind of love and how the river of affection flows, it goes from the husband to wife freely, graciously, and without distinction. Also, a husband's love is sacrificial. Husband's love is sacrificial. Ephesians 5:20. 25 is appropriate here. Similar command, but added with an added dimension. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's always the most convenient. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How did Christ love the church? He died for her. And we could expound the word died in the same way we just did with love. The Son of God didn't come to earth and then 3 hours later die on the cross, right? He lived approximately 33 years in a sin-cursed world, in the likeness of sinful flesh, although without sin himself. He has all the stress, the drama, the pains, the agony of ministry, and joys of feelings. But then he also goes to the cross. But in going to the cross, he didn't just go to the cross and die. He was brutally tortured beyond resemblance. You couldn't even notice it if you were to look at it. And I know you've probably seen pictures of what does the back of someone look like who's received 39 lashes, right? And you know these whips, they have chunks of glass and steel and thorns in them, right? And embedded in the grains of the fibers of the rope. And chunks of flesh are being ripped off the back. Bone is being exposed. Muscles are being exposed. Of course, he has that, and then he suffers the shame of execution on the cross by nails in the feet, nails in hand, crown of thorns. All of these horrible things. That's how Christ died for his people. He didn't say, oh, I'm going to die for my people by giving up the remote control tonight. No, I'm going to suffer pain. I'm going to suffer harm. I'm going to willingly do it. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to be happy to do it. I'm going to forgive my church who hurls insults at me as I go upon loving them. And that's how we're going to die. That's how we're going to live. We're going to love sacrificially. We're going to love in a die-to-self kind of way. And so we are called as men to give up all of ourselves, not only our emotional, spiritual life, but also our physical lives for the benefit of our wife. Husband's love is an edifying love as well. This is still in Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. Let me just make a quick note. Depending on your natural tendencies and how God has gifted you by the Spirit, it might seem easier to you to love your wife by giving yourself up in various things. Or it might seem more easy to love your wife by doing family worship or studying something in the Bible together or reading a book together. Either way, our love for our wife should be communicated not only dying sacrificially and giving ourselves up for her, but also with the purpose of, I want to wash her with the water of the Word. I want to spiritually help her. And wherever she is spiritually, I want to make her grow and cause to love Christ and God more than what she did previously. And again, this isn't to say like, and by the way, all of us know our wives are way better than us, right? Husbands, guys, right? So this isn't saying like the wife is just some like, I don't know, she's just sitting there and you have to do this for her because she is without the ability to do this for herself. No, not at all, of course. But in terms of our way of loving and looking upon our duty as a husband, it is that the Lord gave her to me and she should be better off marrying me than someone else. You know? And you know, some of you guys will be married one day. And you're like that. And you have to realize it will be the hardest thing in life to constantly love the person you wake up next to. And maybe that thought is like, oh no, wait, man, this is gonna be awesome. You know, my wife's amazing, but it's not due to your wife often as much as it's due to your own heart. You know, it will be very, very difficult to continually put aside your own idols and your own definitions of eros love and love your wife in a way in which is glorifying to God. Where are we at? E, fifthly, husband's love for his wife must be visible. So love must be without distinction, must be freely given, must be sacrificial, must be edifying love, and it must be visible. Now, when I say visible, I don't mean do things to just think, virtue signal your love for your wife, and let everyone know, because, we all know that when you do that, it's just kind of sickening. You don't want to see that. What I mean by visible, not virtue signaling, not parading your righteousness around, but there are ways in which a husband's love for his wife are unnoticed to the physical eye, but particularly probably noticed to the wife. And she gets it, because she knows that you're just a scumbag, and it's hard for you to do things. You're trying to do it anyways, right? So, Agape love, biblical love, is Christ-like love in that it is seen. If someone were to come to, let's say you're counseling someone, right? And a couple comes to you and says, "We have problems in our marriage." And the wife says, "I know my husband loves me, but I don't ever see it." Okay? Well, that's a legitimate accusation. It might be a little inaccurate, depending on how you process the was that said objectively? Was that said with a kind of a digging at the husband or whatever? All that. However, normal biblical agape love is visible love. So John 3:1. See what kind, 1 John 3:1. See what kind of love the Father has given to us. So he says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us. So in sending the Son to earth in the form of flesh, living, dying, rising again, it was a visible representation of the love that's in the heart of God. So just as John says in 1 John 3:1, see what kind of love the Father has given us, we should be able to point to at least a few things in our lives where we're saying, these are visible things I'm not doing to show off, but by virtue of me pursuing my love for you, just will naturally happen. And then lastly, on top of all this, there's the overwhelming sense that the husband's love for his wife is the initiating action that will result in a proper response by the wife. I'm probably going to go out on a limb here and say most wives initiate the love shown to their husbands in displays of affection, whatever that may be. But biblical agape love, how did God love us? He loved us and he initiated the love for us. He sent his Son while we were weak, sinners, enemies with him. And he initiated the love. So here's a classic thing. And I have no problem saying this because Sarah's way better at this than I am. She laughs all the time. We get in a fight, okay? Or let me put it this way, we have conflict. Okay, maybe that's better. We have a moment of conflict. Or a series of moments of conflict strung together, okay? She's excellent at being the first to say, I screwed up, forgive me for X, Y, and Z, and this was in my heart, and this was in my heart, and you frustrated me this way, but it didn't really matter because I fell in these ways. And she's awesome at just saying, forgive me. Ideally, the husband should be the one initiating the reconciliation. The husband should be the one saying, okay, I need to lead in showing forgiveness, showing repentance, confession. Not that it's a competition, but the gospel has a way of forming the Christian home in that as the Father sends his Son into the world and initiates reconciliation, so the husband should initiate reconciliation between him and his wife. Scripture makes it clear that humanity can never ascend to God. Rather, all human thought, feeling, action, and worship is a response to a move that was previously initiated by God. We respond to God. We don't ascend and go to God on our own power, and definitely by our own will, unchanged by God. No, we respond to him. And so in a similar and yet in a fallen analogy, the husband needs to pursue initiating love in that way. Let me just say one last thing about the negative command in Colossians 3:19, and then we can wrap up. he says, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Now, by the time we get there, it's like, okay, well, that's no brainer. Because there's no room for harshness in biblical love. There's just no room. There's no room to say, I've been loving you. Why don't you get it? Like, no, you're not loving rightly if you're yelling that kind of threat or clarification. So, some of your translations might say, do not be harsh. Some of them might say, do not become bitter. And bitter might actually have a connotation which is a little more helpful, because it's very easy for someone who loves and gives and gives and gives, when they don't get back, become bitter. Okay, so do not become harsh, or do not become bitter, and even don't make your wife become embittered against you. These are all dimensions of the whole love onion, layers of the love onion. So there's no room for bitterness whatsoever. Christian home is built upon love and proper roles. So I know the wife command seems more functional, submit, and the husband's command seems more relational. But as we've seen last week and here, both are very, very practical and very fitting for how we should see our roles. If we're going to generalize these two commands and saying, wives, submit to your husbands, and we said last week, hey, that's not the only command wives need to worry about, but it's the one Paul chooses to use here. Okay? The wife is the exemplary submissive partner, and the husband is the exemplary loving partner. And again, I can't stand up here in clean conscience and say, like, we're all that great in that, May the Lord help us love rightly, not be harsh with our wives. And for you unmarried, or will be married one day, I'll give this piece of advice that I was given, and it sticks close to my heart. One person told me, find someone to marry who loves their enemies well, because you will be your spouse's enemy at some point. Yeah. And you'll want to have that parachute pulled out for that when you are an enemy to your spouse, that person has that spiritual disposition to love their enemies well, or still love you well, right? So there's a lot to learn here, not only for us who are currently married, those who will get married one day, but husbands, love your wives, and do so as Christ loves us. So, any comments or questions? None of you husbands do anything, so that's good.
There's always comments for husbands who can't keep their mouth shut. So,
Right.
I think one of the things too that's very good for, good for me anyways, reading through the 1 Peter chapter 2, 3 passages. From the first time I looked at that, when Peter says that your wife's a fellow heir of salvation. So, no matter what, at the end of the day, she gets out. You know what I mean? That's kind of a considered joke there, but
Yeah.
you're dealing with a fellow heir.
Yeah.
So just cool your jets. You're talking to one of God's children. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
How you prepare for battle. So to speak.
That's right. I heard Paul Washer, he has a great series on the glory of God in missions, marriage, ministry, and one or two other N words, I forget. But I listened to it when I was dating Sarah, and he had a great point coming out of that passage in 1 Peter 3 to say, you're marrying God's daughter. And fathers are always protective of their daughters. So watch your step, buddy. You know, of course, he said it in his very Washington kind of way. But, yeah, great point, Mike. Co-heirs. Do you have a question or statement? Okay. Uh-oh.
No, I just think it's neat. I think it's amazing. It's wonderful, beautiful how the Lord orchestrates, his creation to, even when he knew that because so God obviously is sovereign, knows all and all-knowing, and he knew what would happen in creation. He knew that all the things that we would struggle with, and he designed it to be a certain way that would exemplify him. And yet when we fell, he also had already planned for where we would struggle most and where yet we still, how Paul is writing, it's so helpful to understand, oh, God is working this through to my sanctification. He's working it through to your sanctification, to their sanctification, for his glory, in reminding us of who he is and who we are in relationship. And I don't know, it's just beautiful in my mind of how loving and caring he is to provide instruction, but also obvious ways that we can see, oh, I'm a scumbag in this way, I'm a failure in this way, and yet he's showing how there's redemption in that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is pretty well wrapped up in Paul's words at the end of 5, that this description and how the husbands and wives ought to love and serve and live with one another is a picture of the gospel. He says in 5:32, this mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So we're a living parable. You know, marriages are a living parable for the heart of the Lord in redeeming sinners. So, yeah, good point, Sarah.
That was what you said.
Yeah, what did I say?
You just said backwards.
5:32, yeah, Ephesians 5:32. Yes, sure.
So actually, with John and I met, the reason we weren't in church on Sunday, we actually had a uniquely timed marriage on Sunday morning. It was sort of a worship type of thing, and then last night we were invited to another wedding, so in 2 weeks we've been invited to actually 1 week to weddings. And I always think that, maybe we go to a funeral and we do the same thing, sort of doing, like, I wonder what they're gonna say at my funeral. And we go to a wedding, I see these young people coming forward, all shiny faced and hopeful, and you just really always pray that they see marriage for the beauty that it is, the foreverness that it is. And it reminded me of a quote from Paul Harvey, who once said, I loved him in his radio show, it'd be really better if you got married, not for better or for worse, but just get married forever. And I always thought that was a good thing, because I think it's like you are entering into a covenant before God that is forever, and that is not always going to be, it's not a 50-50. Some days Don gives me 90 when I barely give 10. And some, and boy, did you go that. But some days, I think there is that balance, and that goes back to like the part about like freely given and not weighing, well, I did this for you, and I'm going to, that kind of thing. It's just that pure love and being so concerned about your spouse, whether like John's really just horribly hard with it and making a hay and just dragging. So I've tried really hard to keep other aspects of the home going, good meals, ironing, making sure everything in laundry, all that he comes at the end of the day, dragging into hopefully a wife that is grateful for his efforts and aware of the difficulties. I think that's that for everything. But just going to 2 weddings in the last week, to me, as a couple, we always kind of sit there, listen to what they're saying, and think, yeah, this is, it kind of is a renewal of our vows.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good reminder. Okay, well, let me pray and we'll close up and have some time to fellowship together. Gracious Father, we are thankful that you have been so wise in weaving the plan of redemption into our everyday lives, even an action of marriage and living married with our husbands or wives. We see that we are a very important picture of the gospel, and may you empower us and give us the ability to walk in your statutes, to put on a display of the gospel that is maybe unbeknownst to us, but that our neighbors, those who don't know you, would actually have a question on why we live with our spouses the way we do. And we can just point to how your gospel has been the driving motivation for that. So thank you for this morning, and be glorified in our time of fellowship here. Praise in Christ's name.